So Monday morning was really cold. I mean, it was a really sharp wind, and there were a lot of people at Cherith Brook looking for a hot meal, a hot shower, maybe some gloves, a minute to go in the cafe and have a warm space or to be in the tent. And in many ways, looking really for connection, for humanity, for a reminder that, you know, I'm not alone, right? Lance looked a lot rougher than most everyone else. He's one of those people, to just see him, you think he's been on the streets, you know, for 50 years, but you look at him and you think you don't know how he's gonna make it through that day, because he's just so thin. And on that day, he had no socks, no hat, he had a hoodie, and he was kind of carrying a blanket. He sort of had it around him, and he was sort of dragging it. And I asked him, and he, you know, was good to have a hat and gloves, and I got him to go into the tent where he could sit down and eat. And there were a couple of other people in there eating already, and then off to the side, there was someone reading, you know, some homeless person reading the Book of Joy, which, you know, I didn't really think about because, of course, I know it's the book that Jody and Eric are using right now for the book study, and there's several volunteers at Peace who are reading it. If you know it, it was written a few years ago by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu when they celebrated their 80th birthday. And you know, they haven't had a super cushy life. I mean, the Dalai Lama was exiled for 50 years, right, from his home and driven away from his family and his people. And Archbishop Tutu, whose life I know quite well, South African resistance leader, the little short African man who couldn't vote, right, until he was 60 or so at 94. And I mean, the white people are 8% of South African population. I lived there a little bit, I've seen it. They have a complete lockdown, right, really a slavery mentality, just a little homeland and you know, reservations where the blacks, who are most of the people, could live, and cut off from all the jobs. So neither one of these guys have had it super simple. So they didn't describe joy as something like being left-handed, but as something that takes work. So in the book, they talk about the pillars of joy, 8 pillars. Some of them are about the head, right? Like patience or persistence or humor or humility and acceptance. And some of them are about the heart, compassion and forgiveness and generosity and gratitude. And it's this understanding that it turns out joy is your work, right? That it's just not natural. You have to dig in and do it. And that's what we hear this morning in, you know, the book of Philippians, which was Paul's book of joy. He's writing from a Roman prison, and we don't get a lot of detail about what the prison cell was like, but there are other places. This is my favorite recruitment tool of Paul, his, you know, words, I believe it was in Corinthians, where he's talking about how he was, you know, imprisoned and flogged and lashed and beaten with rods and stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. For a night and day I was adrift at sea on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers and sisters, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, hunger and thirsty, often without food, cold and naked. And besides other things, I am under daily pressure because of my anxiety for all the churches. I mean, doesn't that sound like a recruitment tool, right, for the ministry? But then he goes on in his own little book of joy, and he calls us to rejoice, right? Rejoice, rejoice, and again I say rejoice. And then he kind of gives us these instructions about how you have to dig in. You know, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, pleasing, commendable, if there's any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things, right? And keep on doing these things. So it's like this real sense of clarity. You know, you don't just wake up every day feeling joyful in the midst of, you know, Capitol riots and, you know, whatever craziness is going on in Jefferson City. You have to like dig in, right? And I sat down this week and had coffee with Sammy Aaron. I talked about her a few weeks ago, the resilient activist. She's the woman who lost her son in 2003. Beautiful, radiant young man, this big environmental activist heart who had gone off to Berkeley. He was in law school and in a master's program in urban ecology. Just incredible guy, beautiful, radiant spirit. I mean, at his funeral, the mayor of Oakland spoke because he was so involved. But that year, 2003, he took his life because he was just in such despair over the state of the earth. And Sammy came along a few years later and began the Resilient Activist when she saw so many other young people really struggling. And so digging in with meditation and yoga and reconnecting to nature. And I asked her, she said, you know, it's been almost 20 years since he's been gone. And I asked, has it just slowly gotten where you could accept it, where the pain wasn't so intense? And she said there was actually an experience that she remembers really clearly. She was with family and friends, and there'd been this triggering incident, joking about ball caps, and the men in her family had always teased one another and stolen each other. And she started crying, and she cried for 3 days. She cried and she cried and she cried. And then she said she made a conscious decision that she didn't want to be that person, that she had to go in a different way. And so then she really dug down and began this real strong discipline of trying to reconnect to nature and reclaim joy in her life. That's work, right? I mean, that's digging in, and that's a discipline. I remember September 11th, like pretty much all of us, extremely clearly. That was, for me, a really unusually full day. I was hosting a lunch at St. Andrew for like 25 clergy. The leader of Arts in Prison, this 80-something-year-old who had started this remarkable program with singers from one of the prisons. She left the Anchorage Opera and come. She was going to speak. And we had these beautiful lunches from Napoleon Bakery, and we were going to try to get all these other clergy and churches involved in this program that reconnects prisoners to community and to their own spirit and soul. But before that, I was going to the apple orchard, Stevenson's apple orchard, with my almost 4-year-old for this glorious field trip. But, you know, like many people, I'd already seen the planes hit. It was just this horrible experience, right? Trying to figure it all out, not knowing where the ground was. And going out to the orchard, I'll never forget, none of us will, that was the most beautiful day. I mean, that was the most beautiful day. I mean, there was not a cloud in the sky. I mean, it was just a vault of blue and sun. And that apple orchard, oh my gosh, and those children just running and playing and squealing. Such a joyful day. And all the parents just stunned, right? And you know, the world wasn't quite as connected, not quite as much stuff on the phone, but going back into the car, and I just will never forget that. Never, never. And then going to the church, I had suggested we cancel that event. We didn't. One person showed up. And listening to this 80-year-old speak from her heart about starting this program and bringing the prisoners in. And then that afternoon, remember, just again, when you had a 4- and 7-year-old, trying to see what was going on, but trying to keep them away from the TV, and fielding the calls from church members and family and friends, and trying to think about a prayer service the next night. And then that evening, Eden, a 7-year-old, and I had tickets to the ballet. It wasn't just any ballet. It was the American Ballet Theater, the greatest company in this country, New York City. I mean, we were so excited about that. And it was like, you weren't sure, was it going to go on? Of course, was it not? Should we go? Should we not? Those dancers from New York City, they had flown to Kansas City on September 10th to begin this 3-week tour. And they had woke up that morning, you know, in one of the hotels, and they had seen their city, right? Their people. And not, I mean, just the crashing of that in their spirit. Not knowing whether their family, their friends, other dancers who'd stayed behind were safe. But they had been at the music hall most of the day rehearsing. And there'd been the question about whether they should dance or not. The production director was worried about their safety, not terror, but whether there would be an injury. It was a very fast-paced, tightly choreographed, and whether, you know, in a moment of being so distracted, there would be something. But it was clear for the phone calls that the Kansas City audience wanted to see them dance. And then there was the challenge that the dance they were doing that night was a Paul Taylor piece set in the Depression in New York City. So the backdrop was the skyline of New York with the World Trade Center on there. It was a modern skyline. And the name of that ballet on that Tuesday, September 11th, was Black Tuesday. That's the name of the ballet, set in this Depression. This sorrowful dances, and then the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. I mean, just this, it was just, I'll never forget that. And I'll never forget how little I remember. as much as my brain can hold. I just remember the theater being so dark and the audience being so quiet. And then the last number, this young man, Ethan Stiefel, this miraculous performance, and then the silent audience, and then he had run back on for the curtain call, holding this American flag. In the last year, the ballet company has written about that day. 7 of the dancers and performers who are still there talking about that experience. Kevin McKissick, who had come out that night and said a few words, talked about, again, how they struggle trying to figure out what to do, whether they should dance or not. And at the end of that day, they had begun at 9 a.m., 1 a.m. in the morning. They were supposed to get on a flight the next day for San Diego and the rest of the tour, but the flights were grounded. So instead they got 2 buses, and they got on those buses, and they drove 30 hours so they could dance in San Diego on that Thursday night. And they danced and danced and danced for 3 weeks, every night, night after night, thinking about their home and their people and that craziness, and they danced, they danced. And even now I wonder, did that really happen? Really? I mean, I have to reread the story. How they expressed such sorrow and expressed such unbelievable joy and confidence, right? That ballet was all about this country coming out of the Depression and this belief that we could do it. And Kevin McKissick, the director, said, on that Monday when they left New York, it was a fun-filled tour. But on that Tuesday, it became a mission. And I wonder if that might not be the truth for our lives right now. In a time where it feels like the terror that was once far away has come so close, right? In our own schools. And so much we're powerless, so much. The tornadoes, the tumors that ravage our friends. And I wonder if the way that we win, if the way that we push back, if the way that we do that, what our beautiful Mary Oliver said about holding fast to our life, is we insist on rejoicing. We insist on it somehow every day, waking up and finding a way to dig deep, to look at the beauty that is all around us, the beauty that is in us, and to claim us. May that be our mission, right? Not just on this Sunday of joy, but all the days to come. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say, rejoice. Amen.